Greetings, this is Dr. McCarthy for CMST 275 Online Communications at South Seattle Community College. How is everyone doing today? Since we are into Unit 1 and we are into the first chapters of Your Life Uploaded by Jim Gimmel and Gordon Bell, I thought we should take a moment and talk about some of the important terms that are being used by these authors in this textbook. Two of the most important terms, and I think they're most important because we'll be using these terms a lot, are the terms life logger versus life blogger. Early on in the book, and I think it's around page 20, the authors write that those who put their lives up on the web for others to view are called life bloggers, blog being short for weblog. I am a life logger, not a life blogger. That is, I log my life into my e-memory. I may be old-fashioned, but it strikes me as foolish to publish too much, especially to an unrestricted audience. Now, of course, we're going to be talking a great deal about what happens when you do end up publishing too much to an unrestricted audience, especially when we start talking about situations such as Facebook, Twitter, Google+, and other modes of social media. But what I find interesting about this book is although the authors are very firm in that they are life loggers and not life bloggers, they spend very little time talking about the phenomena of life blogging, a phenomena that I would say is gaining far more speed in our contemporary society than life logging is. A matter of fact, if you did a general search of their book, you will find that they mention the idea of life blogging or just the life blogger only 3 times throughout the book. Vlogging, they actually mention that 49 times in this textbook, which demonstrates that they are far more concerned about this idea of life logging than they are about life blogging. So the big question is, why is this important? I mean, seriously, why should we care that they mention life blogging only 3 times and life logging over 40 times? Well, I think it's important because one of the things we're going to discover in the book is that part of the problem with this idea of a e-memory archive is that whatever we have privately can easily be turned into public archives, whether we like it or not. If we leave all of our information on a private hard drive, but somebody gets a hold of that hard drive, it is a very easy process to upload all that information, or at least any pieces of that information, up to the internet for other people to see. So life logging can become life blogging in a momentary point of time. And so we need to look at this feeling, this understanding of why it's a problem. Now, our authors do spend a little bit of time explaining why this is a problem. For example, later on in the book, and much later in the book, I think it's about page 213, they write, if life logging becomes life blogging, then the successors to Facebook and Twitter could have detailed records of every parameter of your life with location, biometrics, sights, and sounds. Imagine for a moment that all memories are shared. One could then dream of data mining all these memories, looking for a collective good, much the way that my personal memories will be mined for my own good. They may even arise to some kind of cyber communism that demands all of your information for the public good. For example, your location to help with city planning and emergency management. Here he gives us a very good warning, a warning that says, wait a minute, if we put all of our information within a public forum, what may happen? Of course, the idea of a public communism as some kind of an absolute end means of life blogging is a bit of an alarmist point of view, but one that we should consider anyways. The question is this. Is life blogging a bad thing? Is it automatically the great evil that Gordon Bell and Jim Gimmel kind of make it out to be? I'm not entirely sure. The problem is that we are in a space where we are starting to actively redefine our understanding of what constitutes private versus what constitutes moments of publicness. We are even actively redefining the difference between the private sphere as compared to the public sphere. Indeed, it used to be that we would go into the middle, for example, of Times Square, right, in New York City, and we would think of that as a public space in which we could gather. And yet, that public space is mostly owned by private entities now. And as such, those private entities can start to determine when we cannot use it as a public. The same thing has been experienced recently by the Occupy movement. The Occupy movement is trying to recapture by physically occupying public spaces in order to make a point. The point being that private enterprise is starting to redefine our public spaces. And yet, we actually have a huge problem with this. Sometimes the problem is quite valid in the sense that many of these Occupy encampments became quite dirty. They became even spaces for the potential of spreading disease. And we had to do something about that. But there is something to be said about wanting to reclaim public spaces and become public. I'm wondering if the Occupy movement would have had any ability to function at all about 20 years ago, when the idea of public versus private was a lot more clear cut. Today, we even see our phone conversations as being very public acts. But when I grew up, a phone conversation was a very private act. If my parents wanted to talk on the phone, they would go into another room. They would even probably shut the door. The same could be said about having a conversation out in public. If I wanted to call somebody while I was out in public, I would seek out a telephone booth, a booth that could enclose me and my conversation so that I could have a private conversation with the other person on the other side of that line. But today, because of cell phones, we can take our conversations anywhere. And all of a sudden, this very private act of having a phone conversation has become a very public act. Indeed, I can't go to the bathroom in a public restroom anymore without having somebody have a conversation on the stall in the stall next to me. For me, it makes me feel very uncomfortable because this whole redefinition of what is private versus what is public is starting to invade what I have considered to be my private spaces. So why am I going on this diatribe about public versus private spaces and moments? Well, I'm considering this right now because there is an active redefinition between public and private every single time we use social media. When we are on Twitter, on Facebook, on Google+, on Pinehurst, on any of these different modes in which we are sharing information about our lives, what we are doing, articles that we are reading, and where we have to be at that moment in time, this kind of a change is really changing how we view what we do privately versus what we do publicly. One of the most extreme examples is when we check in. Many people uses the program Foursquare, and they don't bother to change their privacy settings on this particular program. And if you hook this program up to your Twitter accounts and your Google Plus accounts and your Facebook accounts, you can be very public telling people where you are and when you are there. On the outside, it looks like a positive thing. Certainly, businesses benefit from this a great deal. If I check in at, for example, a Denny's, right, and I say that, oh, I love the French fries at the Denny's, then I'm offering this particular Denny's free advertisement. But on the other hand, let's say somebody had been watching my house and they wanted an opportunity to break in and take a few choice items. Well, if they followed me on my Twitter account or my Foursquare account or even my Facebook account somehow, they could now know that I am away from the house and that house is ready for them to occupy it. So there is this weird moment between our lives of public blogging versus our public logging. And I think one thing that we will explore a great deal during this class is this gray space to be life logging versus what we consider to be life blogging. And if we are going to participate in life blogging, are we going to kind of try to control that information so that we aren't offering it to an unrestricted audience, as Gordon Bell so phrases in his book? How can we do that? And can we trust that when we have set our privacy settings so that only our friends know that we are checking in somewhere, that indeed only our friends are able to get that information? As we enter this new digital landscape in which we record almost everything we're doing in our lives, what we're thinking about, and what we are exploring, we have to ask ourselves, what limits are we willing to place upon this new effort? And what limits should be placed upon this new effort? And how are we going to become conscious about those moments of private moments of freedom that we might be losing to the public? And so, while you take the time to read the first few chapters of your Life Uploaded, and you start to consider this idea of e-memory and what it means to become a life logger, I also want you to consider seriously about those moments in life when life logging becomes life blogging, and what are those consequences of that moment. Sometimes they're going to be good consequences, but sometimes those consequences might not be so clear. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to seeing everybody on the discussion boards for CMST 275 online communication at South Seattle Community College. Goodbye.